Welcome to today's Explainer. We've got a really fascinating psychological case study lined up for you, drawn straight from ancient wisdom. We're looking at a story from the Dhammapada stories called Bhikkhu or Brahmana. Now don't let the ancient setting throw you off. What we're actually diving into is a super profound look at human psychology, the sheer fragility of happiness, and what actually makes up a person's character.
Okay, let's kick things off with a question that hits just as hard today as it did thousands of years ago. Does your job, your clothes, or your social status define your true character? I mean, in our modern world, we're kind of obsessed with labels, right? We curate these perfect online profiles, we dress for success, we chase those big job titles, usually because we think all these external things will magically bring us internal peace and a solid identity. But do they? Let's check out a story that completely flips everything we think we know about status on its head.
All right, setting the stage with our first section, the illusion of status. So, to really get this case study, we have to look at a guy who had literally hit the absolute peak of external success. We're talking about a highly capable military officer who just scored a massive victory for his king by successfully crushing a dangerous rebellion. And the king? He was thrilled. He rewarded this officer handsomely with incredibly costly gifts. The officer was given days just to kick back and soak in his triumph, eating rich food, drinking fine wine, the whole shebang. Plus, the king gave him a beautiful dancing girl to keep him entertained. She danced so gracefully that the officer quickly fell madly in love with her. He was literally living the dream. Sensual and material reward, he had it all.
But here's where things get really interesting. One morning, the officer is heading down to the river to take a bath, just totally riding the high of his own success. On the way, he casually runs into the Buddha and his disciples, who are out on their morning alms round. And the officer just gives this simple, casual bow of respect. Well, the Buddha smiles. And he turns to his disciple Ananda and makes this absolutely stunning prediction. He says that later that very day, this partying, highly successful officer would come to see him, attain full enlightenment, and then pass away. Specifically, he said, that officer will today realize parinibbana. Meanwhile, the officer, of course, has absolutely no idea what is coming his way.
Which leads us into our next section, a sudden tragic turn.
While the Buddha knew exactly how this was going to play out, the officer just went right back to his hedonistic celebration on the riverbank, dizzy with delight. But here's the thing about external happiness. Happiness that totally relies on temporary, outside conditions, it is incredibly fragile. He's sitting there watching his beautiful, lissom dancer ceaselessly swirl and twirl for his amusement, and then the unthinkable happens. Right there in front of him, that very evening, the dancer suddenly collapses from sheer exhaustion. And she dies, just like that. The music stops, the celebration is over, and the absolute center of his desire and joy is just gone. Let's unpack the psychology of this in The Root of Sorrow. As you can imagine, this sudden loss absolutely breaks the officer. In a matter of hours, he goes from being this victorious, celebrated military hero to a fiercely grieving, completely broken man. Desperate for some kind of comfort, with his eyes still wet and swollen from weeping, he actually seeks out the Buddha. He's just looking for relief from this intense psychological pain. And what the Buddha does next is a brilliant psychological intervention. He completely reframes the officer's grief. He tells him, the tears you shed due to this loss are nothing compared to the amount you have already shed throughout your previous lifetimes. Just think about that for a second. The Buddha is zooming him way out, shifting his focus from this immediate, narrow pain to the vast, endless cycle of suffering he's experienced over and over. And then he hits him with the ultimate question, isn't it time to stop?
Then, the Buddha pinpoints the exact psychological mechanism that's driving all this pain. He says, desire is the root of your sorrow. Why not get rid of that and have no more sorrow? He's challenging the officer to pull the weed out by the root. And because this guy had just experienced the extreme whiplash of losing his ultimate desire, it clicked. He truly understood. In that exact moment, by the end of the discourse, his mind completely shifted. He instantly attained arahatship, which is full spiritual liberation. And then, soon after, exactly as the Buddha had predicted that morning, the officer passed away.
Let's look at the fallout of this in Section 4, Clothes Do Not Make Character.
Okay, so this extraordinary event sparked a lot of confusion among the bhikkhus, the other monks. They were intensely curious, because think about it. Here was a man who achieved the ultimate spiritual goal, parinibbana, but he died still wearing the rich, ornate clothes of a layperson, a military officer. They asked the Buddha, should we consider this man a bhikkhu, a monk, or a Brahmana, a holy man?
And this sets up a really fascinating contrast between the external and the internal. Outwardly, his appearance was totally worldly. He's wearing the uniform of status, wealth, and military rank. But internally, his state of mind in those final moments was perfectly pure, completely free from greed, free from hatred, and free from delusion.
The Buddha's verdict here cuts right to the heart of what we're exploring today. He told the monks that the officer could rightly be called both a Bhikkhu and a Brahmana. Why? Because true holiness, character, and nobility have absolutely nothing to do with the uniform you wear or the title you hold. They are strictly defined by whether or not your mind is pure. That's the only metric that matters. And this perfectly illustrates the core teaching in verse 142 of the Dhammapada. It says, "Even though he may be well-dressed, if he is calm, free from defilements, with his senses controlled, established in the holy way, perfectly pure, and has laid aside enmity toward all beings, he is indeed a holy man, a renunciant, a month." So, you can be walking around in the finest tailored suits or a military uniform, but if your internal landscape is calm and free of hostility, you are fundamentally a person of high character.
Bringing it all together in our final section, cultivating true inner peace.
Now, we might not be ancient military officers, but the psychology here is 100% universal. So how do we take this ancient wisdom and actually use it in our crazy modern lives? It really comes down to shifting our focus away from curating our outward status and toward managing our actual minds. Here are a few actionable steps straight from this case study. First, identify your attachments. What external things, like your job, your relationships, your social standing, are you clinging to? Second, recognize that obsessing over those desires is the actual root of your anxiety and sorrow. Third, prioritize your mental purity over your social roles. Focus on being kind and free from hatred, no matter what your job description says. And finally, pursue the noble cause of good deeds without needing a fancy title to validate you. True internal peace happens when we realize that goodness is entirely an inside job.
I want to leave you with one final provocative thought. If your external titles, your nice clothes, your social media presence, and your job were all completely stripped away today, what would your internal state look like? Are you relying on the uniform to make you who you are, or are you cultivating a mind that is calm, pure, and resilient all on its own? It's definitely something to chew on as we try to incorporate this real-world mindfulness into our lives to achieve true, lasting internal peace. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer today. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll catch you next time.